Hello, everybody. I am your host, Ryan Anderson. Welcome back to another episode of the Gallop Out. Today, we get to be live, and I am joined by my co-host, or guest rather, for today. That is none other than Todd Schrupp over from FanDuel TV. Todd, how are you doing?
I'm in Lexington, Kentucky. It's one of my favorite places in the world, and Keeneland Racecourse is one of the great treasures in any sport, let alone horse racing. So I'm doing great. I'm my own IT department, though, so the angle's not great from my hotel room, but at least you're able to hear me and I'm able to hear you. So thank you very much for having me for what is a great show. You do really good work.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I was really excited. I got the opportunity to get you on. You mentioned you're in Keeneland. I assume you're there for, are you there for the entire autumn meet or just for this opening weekend?
It's going to be this opening weekend and then the following week. Obviously, FanDuel will have a presence each and every day here. So we'll have full team coverage here. A lot of times I'll stay through as much of the meet as possible. What's happened essentially with FanDuel TV, our content has grown. So in a Breeders' Cup year where the Breeders' Cup is out at Del Mar, we get back a little bit earlier. Some of our colleagues stay behind at Keeneland, but we got to get ready for the Breeders' Cup and the breakfast shows that happen there. And then in the spring meet, we're now doing a lot more with the Kentucky Derby. So that's usually my longest stretch here, and I love it. I really consider Kentucky, this whole area, particularly Lexington, a second home for me. So, yeah, I wish I could stay more than the first couple of weeks, but I'll be here. And then one other thing I did want to mention, because it's, you're kind of exemplary of the type of people that they honor. Goodall, a program that is actually worldwide. It's called the Thoroughbred Industry Employee Awards. And there's various categories, but they're going to be honoring the finalists and the winners on Tuesday, October 15th. So I will be here until Sunday, the 13th for racing, and I'm going to stick around a couple of days. And it's going to be my honor to host that event for back-to-back years. But there's always something going on around this meet, and I'm really looking forward to the TIEA ceremony, which will be in about a week and a half.
Absolutely. That's going to be incredible. I'm sure that's got to be a really special event going on out there, as well as just all the lore of Keeneland and that entire luxurious racetrack. I want to get out there. I have a weekly co-host, Jackson Muniz. He'll be there next weekend to enjoy the racing from out at Keeneland. I know, our friend Howard Kravitz will be out there this weekend, along with we have our new show on that HHH Racing Channel with Noah Meagher called Pacific Horseplayers. Noah goes to school out in Kentucky, so he's out at Keeneland this weekend. I got a little bit of FOMO. I'm missing out for sure, but I will make it out there eventually.
And make sure those guys, since they're out here, they stop by the set and say hello. I'd like to talk to them.
Absolutely. If they're not in here listening, I'll make sure to follow up with them. I'm pretty excited. I get to go to Santa Anita this weekend, starting tomorrow. Good friend and mentor Tom Quigley. I'll get to be on his simulcast show he is quite the guy. He's awesome. So I'll be staying up there this weekend, getting to hang around Santa Anita, meet all those awesome people, and I'm just excited to get into this wonderful weekend of racing because I think Keeneland's leading the charge, but Santa Anita and Belmont at Aqueduct also have a lot of Breeders' Cup when you're in races. So it's fast and furious all throughout the weekend.
And you're going to be on a very good show. How to get into television, and particularly to cover horse racing, has changed quite a bit since when I started in the industry versus you starting in the industry. And the one arena that was just kind of coming into being was the simulcast host. So there wasn't always, when you showed up at the track, there was someone in the paddock talking about the horses that they like, giving their observations, or a pre-race day show. That kind of really started about the time that I got into the industry. And that's how a lot of people worked their way up and eventually went on to television. Technology has obviously changed that. You can have your own podcast and you can have your own show like we're having here. But having said that and seen a lot of simulcast shows around the country, Tom Quigley truly is one of the best out there. If you're out at an OTB or somewhere watching that signal, that is one you turn the volume up for and listen for. And a lot of it has to do with the guests. So he has found a gem in you. And I have to say, Tom Quigley, this industry is better for his presence in it, not only because what he does in the simulcast, but then on social media, he gives his observations from the paddock. He's great at looking at a horse to determine physically if they're ready to run. And then what he does in the Logan Lounge. I mean, every track has a VIP program, but there's something special about Santa Anita's location, the Logan Lounge, where it is. It's breathtaking. And on top of that, Tom runs it up there, or Katie is right by his side. In fact, I've got a couple of friends who are visiting Santa Anita for the first time over the weekend, and I said, I'll make sure that Tom takes care of you in the Logan Lounge because you have to see it. I did that one year with a friend of mine who's from around this area, and he's a really, really good horse player. He's one of the best horse players I've met in the country, and he's a huge Bengals fan. So they were playing in the Super Bowl, and he said, I've never been to Santa Anita. I'm going to come out early. Can you hang out? I said, absolutely. So we went to the Logan Lounge. We're having lunch, playing the races, and then about midway through the day, he stops and turns to me. He said, there's only one problem with this. I said, what's that? He goes, it's so beautiful, I forget to wager. And that's what I love about Santa Anita. It is, when we talk about special places for racing, to me, there is no racing industry without a viable Santa Anita. And I love it every time I go there. And for anyone in our audience who's ever thought about going to Santa Anita and hasn't done it, put it on your list and just make it happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Santa Anita, along with, my personal favorite, Del Mar, but they are quite, I would say, contradictory in terms of the environment you walk into. Both are infectious, but obviously you have Del Mar with, right next to the sea. And then when you walk into the huge racetrack that is Santa Anita, and you see those San Gabriel Mountains in the back, it really does take your breath away. It is quite the sight.
I always tell people, if you're coming for the first time and you go through one of the main entrances, and you'll know which one I'm talking about because it's right where the fountain is and they have so many monuments. So you will see the big Santa Anita on the facade of the grandstand. You'll see this large opening where you can walk into the main part of the grandstand. You can keep walking out to the track apron. I always tell people, if you're coming for the first time, walk by that fountain, walk through that main entrance, walk out on that track apron. It's exactly what you said. All of a sudden, the San Gabriel Mountains are revealed, that infield, that track, and it is, to me, it's like walking on a Hollywood soundstage. It's perfection. And so first time to Santa Anita, make that walk like you said, and then look at those mountains and think about how they've been there for centuries, and but they're different every day.
Absolutely. I think just, with your description of Santa Anita, obviously you were just talking about Keeneland before then. I think it really comes across your love for the horse racing industry. So to just kind of go back in time, what kind of inspired you to pursue a career in horse racing industry and then eventually into the broadcasting side?
Well, you and I kind of have a similar track in our roots, and without a doubt, that's Del Mar. My dad was in the Marine Corps. He was stationed at Camp Pendleton just up the road. And so my first remembrance of the track, I was about 7 years old. And I would challenge you to tell me what you remember about the time you were 7. And for me, of all the things that happened to me, the only thing I can remember is my dad taking me to Del Mar. We got on a bus at Camp Pendleton. We took it down to Del Mar. I'll never forget, on one of the trips, there was an elderly lady and her daughter who took an interest in me. And so they started talking to my dad and I. And then when we got to the track, my dad said to them, do you want to take him? Which you would never do now. You would never just turn your kid over to strangers. But he did. And I came back, and she also got me a signed pair of goggles for Bill Shoemaker. I still have those goggles to this day. But I can remember our visits to the racetrack when I was 7. I remember nothing about that other period in my life. So there was something about it that grabbed me in that moment. Now, obviously from there, my dad getting out of the Marine Corps, going back into civilian life, I didn't have a racetrack to go to because home was Minnesota. And so about the time that I was in high school, going to Chaska High School, they built a track in Shakopee, Minnesota, which was just across the river, and it was called Canterbury Downs. It's had many different names as it's gone through different financial struggles, but unlike, say, Hollywood Park, unlike Calder Racecourse, it's still there. And Canterbury is where I officially got my start. I was getting ready to go off to college, and I wanted a summer job. And I didn't even want to do anything in the afternoon. What I wanted to do was play the races. I picked up a book by Andy Beyer called The Winning Horse Player, and I read it cover to cover, and then I couldn't get enough of everything he wrote about. And he wrote about being a professional horse player and the romance of it. These places that I could only think of because there was nothing to watch on TV unless it was a Triple Crown prep race on ABC or another major network. But you'd see Hialeah, but he'd write about Hialeah, he'd write about Gulfstream, he'd write about these tracks, and there was a romanticism to it. And I'm like, I want to be a professional gambler. So before I went to college, I just wanted to play the races in the afternoon. So I just wanted to make money in the morning to do that. I went in to interview, said I'm just kind of looking for a maintenance job. I'm going off to college. And yeah, I know a lot about the sport. And so horse racing was new, and they started asking me questions about my knowledge. And I had a pretty good knowledge because I read these Andy Beyer books. I made my own speed figures before they were published. And they said, you know what? You don't belong in maintenance. You need to be teaching people about horse racing because horse racing is new to Minnesota. So the first job I got was in customer service. You wear this giant red coat and you'd sit in this information booth and people would come up and go, where do I buy a taco? Where do I go to the bathroom? How do I get a program? You get all these questions. And it made me better because I was teaching people, and eventually they had me do seminars. They called it the Revival Tent. They set up a tent outside that people could show up, and I had a little dais with a microphone, and I teach people the basics of wagering. I teach them some basics about handicapping. And what I loved about that experience is it grew every year. So I went to college, but I went to college in Storm Lake, Iowa for a year, got homesick, came back. But I would keep that job at Canterbury. When they were open, I would keep that job. So each year I would get more responsibility. I'd be the backup track announcer. I'd help out in marketing. And what I've always loved about the racetrack experience to this day, if you're a young person, you can wear many hats. They don't just categorize you and say, well, this is your strength, you go do that. You're forced to do just about everything and learn something hands-on in horse racing. So I spent 5 years at Canterbury like that. The job was eventually eliminated with their financial problems. And I had my winter of discontent. And I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do. And all of a sudden a call came from the former track announcer at Canterbury. His name is Tony Bentley, still one of the coolest guys I've ever met in racing. And he said, a friend of mine, Ken Dunn, is the general manager of a track called Calder Racecourse in Miami, Florida. They have an opening for a simulcast host. Would you be interested? Well, I was desperate for a job, number one, in the middle of winter, and I'm being told there's a job in horse race. Man, I played it cool. I'm like, yeah, I could find time to go down there and interview. I went down and interviewed in March of 1992. They offered me the job on the spot. I went to South Florida. It was the same thing. I wore all these hats. I was the simulcast guy. I hosted the replay show, which they hardly have anymore at any racetracks. I don't think anybody does. But it was a big deal to be on the replay show because that's how people kept up. And what's funny, I'll reveal something to the Twitter, because you're big on horse racing Twitter, and I know there's some horse racing Twitter people tuning in. And this will, if you follow what goes on. So do you know, is it 46 flat or Tinky or whatever? What is
it's like Tinky Flat, I think.
Yeah,
I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, so he is. In fact, I think Rapoli just called him out today on horse racing Twitter. Anyway. Yeah. That was the guy I replaced. It's Tony Kobitz. He did reveal who he was a while ago, but Tony Kobitz was the simulcast guy down in South Florida, and he handed the mic to me, so I kind of knew him going way back. But in that experience, I thought maybe I'd found where I was going to stay the rest of my career. Florida is one of those places you go, and you think, well, I'm only going to be here for a few years to transition to somewhere else, and then all of a sudden, I may live here the rest of my life. So I got nearly 7 years into that job, and I thought, well, this is it. I mean, Miami's my thing, and I'm going to be in South Florida, and I'll just do the circuit. And then I'm looking in the daily racing form, which I have right here, and there's an ad, and it's for a startup horse racing network called TVG. Please send your tape. So I sent in a VHS tape. That's the time we're talking about, 1992 is when I started there. So it was about 1990. I was 99 because actually that winter I auditioned. So it was 1999. And so I sent in my VHS tape. They bring me out for an audition. I auditioned with Greg Wolf, who's obviously now with Fox Sports and is one of the greatest out there. And Greg was struggling. He was struggling. And so I was having the audition of my life. And I didn't know if I'm competing with Greg. I don't, in fact, I just kind of assumed anyone I'm on the air with, I'm kind of going for the same job. So I wasn't helping Greg out. And I'll never forget, Tony Olivato was one of my first bosses. He ran the auditions. He's now obviously running those Fox Sports shows with Greg. He gets in my ear and he goes, help Greg along. So I helped Greg out. Greg got the job. I got the job. Matt Carruthers got the job. If you go back and look at those original hosts at TVG, it was quite a lineup. Chris Harrison, the first host of The Bachelor. We had a lot of really talented people on that first staff. I know this is just one question, and I've gone on about 12 minutes. But when I think of my progression from where I started at Canterbury, just trying to get a maintenance job so I could play the races in the afternoon, to then getting all those opportunities at Canterbury, which led to all those opportunities at Calder, which led me to eventually TVG. I'm very fortunate. There's a timing to things, but I think the larger message is if you really want something and you stay dedicated to it and you work hard for it, it can absolutely happen. And I'm a product of, obviously a big dream that I had, but I'm also the result of people who believed in me and the connections I made along the way, because no one ever gets there by themselves. Whether it was me reading an Andy Byer book, I'll always be grateful for that. Whether it was me getting to know Tony Bentley, who was the track announcer at Canterbury, which led to the call to Ken Dunn, and then getting the opportunity to work with Mike Cronin, the marketing director down there. My advice to anybody who's getting in any industry, yes, education and the rest of it's important and technical training, but it is the people you meet, the connections that will ultimately make the difference, not only in your career, but in your life as well. So that was a long answer to how I eventually ended up to TVG and FanDuel, but a great question. I love it.
Well, that was an excellent response. Thank you for giving us all that detail. Thank you for letting us know who Tinky is, because I'm sure there's some people that have wondered that for a very long time.
Tony Cohen.
And you mentioned joining TVG right as they were kind of starting up in '99. Obviously, you've been with them, who is now, FanDuel TV, as they've kind of merged together over the past few years. So obviously, you've seen all the evolution in that network. What's one of the changes that's kind of excited you most, and what's something maybe you guys are looking forward to in the future, if there's anything in the works?
Is not having to worry about whether or not we're going to be there the next year. I cannot overstate, and our audience would have to have gone through it with me to completely understand. Having the security of a company like FanDuel being in their family is something that I never imagined throughout my time at TVG, because we were always year to year. In fact, the first 2 years, I didn't unpack everything that I bought from Florida. Brought from Florida. It was never working. It was never working. And the darkest day at TVG. So the whole idea was we were going to launch, and we're going to be this horse racing network. And your generation right now is just used to the idea. If you like hockey, there's NHL Network. If you like baseball, there's MLB TV. If you like the NBA, there's NBA TV. Whatever sport you like, there's a niche channel that is dedicated to it. But I want you to remember a time in 1999 when TVG was launching. There was the tennis channel and there was the golf channel, and then there was us. So horse racing had a huge opportunity to be third into that market and be that niche channel. So it was a very, very exciting time. But we also realized we couldn't just show the races. We needed money coming in. So you needed to be able to wager on those races. So the whole idea of advanced deposit wagering, where you could sit at home or be on your phone and wager, that was a totally new concept. It wasn't legal in all 50 states. I don't think it's still legal in all 50 states, Texas being the greatest example. So we were slowly rolling out in each state. And then the more states we got, the more revenue we got in, and then the network could make it. But in the first couple of years, we basically hardly had any money coming in. So corporate parents that we had at the time, many came through, including, I think, News Corporation at one time. We were owned by a lot of different conglomerates along the way. And it's like, what is this horse racing channel? But a significant moment was betting in California. And about 3 years in, after we launched, California passed advanced deposit wagering. So now, with each state, it would ensure our future. California having them wager would ensure a future for a long time. So they passed the legislation. We're all excited. And then at the 11th hour, Governor Gray Davis vetoes it. And all of a sudden, we're thrown into chaos. So our CEO at the time was a guy named Mark Wilson. I still see him when I'm here in Kentucky. There would be no amalgamation of what we have now. We wouldn't even have made it to FanDuel TV without Mark Wilson's leadership, because those were really, really difficult days. But he called the entire staff into the newsroom after the ADW legislation was vetoed. And he said, look, I'm going to give it straight to you guys. And I've said this from the beginning. If we didn't get this ADW legislation, we were going to have to make cuts. It's been vetoed. I think we have a chance to maybe come back next year with a new governor and get another look at it. But today we're going to have to let half of you go. So these people that I'd been there with for 2 years that were all on this mission to make this network work, half of them were going to leave that day. And we were called, it was basically, those of you staying are going to take a 20% pay cut. And we're going to send each of you into different rooms. There were 2 conference rooms. One conference room is the people who were staying with the 20% pay cut. The other conference room are the people who are going to be let go. And you'd walk into this conference room and you look around and you kind of hope you saw the right person. It's like, oh, they're probably going to keep that person. And fortunately, I stayed. I took the 20% pay cut and stayed. The following year, we got ADW. And then it still was a struggle, but we kept proving ourselves year after year. Then Betfair comes along and buys this about 10 years in. But they were looking at not only the horse racing business, but the hope that sports betting would happen. Sports betting gets legalized essentially state by state with the Supreme Court ruling. They end up buying FanDuel as entree into that. But horse racing was always the platform that kept the network going. And so once we became part of FanDuel, that pressure of, are we going to be here next year, was gone. And so the biggest thing is when people talk about, okay, FanDuel, yes, their main business is sports betting. The truth is we're part of this larger company called Flutter Entertainment. They run lotteries on a global scale. They run online poker. They run an online casino. I mean, they have a portfolio that is the envy of any company that's in the gaming world. So the fact that horse racing was the cornerstone that eventually became part of what FanDuel is today, even if sports betting is dominating the landscape, I'm very excited, and the industry should be excited, because you have a company who's a clear leader in sports betting that cares about horse racing, is spending the money to give us more content and the best content, spending the money to upgrade our infrastructure. So that transition has been big, and I think in one simple way, and that is stability. Stability is very important. You want to know that this sport is going to have an outlet like this to be around. Yes, there have been some changes with other sporting shows coming on early in the morning, but it hasn't infringed on the main product. But yeah, I would say overall, the great blessing to FanDuel and being part of Flutter is stability.
Absolutely, yeah. A company like FanDuel, you said it best, really is, with their bigger company in Flutter, but that really is just a huge vote of confidence for you guys and your team, and that has to, the stability aspect is massive. It can't be understated, really, at all.
Can I ask you, Ryan, and because you're part of the generation that everybody wants to attract. We always talk about, we need more young people in horse racing. You come along, you love it, you're passionate about it. But what about the brand, the brand part of it too? Because part of this too is the fact that we're FanDuel TV. The FanDuel brand amongst your generation seems to be well known. And a lot of your generation, people, you have friends who are in states that allow sports betting. Do you feel that your generation connects with the FanDuel brand maybe more than they would have with TVG?
I definitely think so. I think when I first started watching racing, which was like 2019, so not too long ago, but it was just TVG then. I was watching, and obviously it stood for television games. So I was a little confused. And then, but yeah, you said it, when a company like FanDuel buys it, I was into FanDuel. I know I'm in California, so the sports betting side wasn't active, but they had those daily fantasy lineups. So that was something I played a lot, and that was something FanDuel did. So I was very familiar with their name. And when I saw they bought TVG and became FanDuel TV, I think that's something that definitely appeals more to people in my generation because it's a name that we're immediately familiar with. I would say as much as, something like ESPN at this point, where like they have ESPN Bet, but I know people that are really just FanDuel really oriented because they offered everything first essentially. And they were kind of I guess pioneer is a word you could use, but they were really first in the daily fantasy lineups, and then with sports betting rollouts and everything like that. So it's a name that inspires a lot of confidence with people and definitely some good recognition.
That is a great description of it because, while I'm sitting here talking about the story of TVG and the brand and how it came to be, FanDuel is growing as well. They were in the fantasy market wondering if they would ever get a chance to take it to sports betting. And that's what I found. And now that Kentucky has sports betting, I'll be out and someone will know horse racing, we'll talk horse racing, but then immediately they'll pull up their FanDuel app and talk about the parlay that they have. And they're usually a 20-something like you. And it's very heartening to now be part of this brand that, it's like you said, TVG stood for Television Games Network. That was very intentional because I think they knew they were going to expand at some point beyond horse racing. That's why they call it Television Games. But when you say FanDuel, that crosses over to a lot of different people. And what's nice is it gives us an opportunity. If someone came to FanDuel and primarily for sports betting, but they're in a state obviously with horse racing, it's our chance to now make them a horse player as well.
Absolutely, yeah. Being in California, I just mentioned, I'm anxiously waiting to see if we ever get sports betting approved, because that would be massive, not only for FanDuel, but for everything. Everyone involved, that would be just such a massive passing if that bill ever gets across that table. Just to kind of pivot back to horse racing now. Obviously, yeah, you talked about how great the stability is. We know you're in Lexington right now. You grew up down at Del Mar. Having covered races across so many tracks, starting at Calder and what is now Canterbury Park, do you have a personal favorite? And then is there a track that, stands out to you, or what makes that track stand out to you?
Well, I love every track I go to because of the and everybody's experience. You know what it's like? My dad said this because my dad, when he got out of horse racing, he went into the retail side of music, and he worked for a company called The Record Shop, which no longer exists because records barely exist now. But I remember, working sometimes in the record shop, and so he made a point about with music, you could put a certain album on sale, and it doesn't mean people are going to buy it because maybe they just don't like that particular band or they don't like that particular artist. It's a very personal thing. Music is a very personal thing. So I can say my favorite racetrack is this, but someone will have an experience at their local track that may not be in the category of Keeneland. It may not be in the category of Saratoga or Del Mar or, the big racetracks that we talk about. There might be someone who loves, say, Emerald Downs and the view of Mount Rainier. And that's the beautiful thing to me about my job and what I'll always be grateful for, the experience of TVG and FanDuel TV. It has allowed me to go to more racetracks than I would have if I were just a fan. And I have loved every racetrack I have been to. Having said that, Keeneland holds a really special place in my heart because when I worked in South Florida, we had a conversation one night after the races. My boss, as I mentioned earlier, his name, and he's now involved in Minnesota horse racing. It was Mike Cronin. He was the head of marketing. And we would have a poker game every night in the Calder Press, not every night, but every Sunday night at the end of the racing week in the Calder Press Box. It was great because they had all these, it was an actual library with a huge table that we played on. It was all these American racing manuals. So, all kinds of horse racing history surrounding you. We'd sit there, Phil Saltzman, the late track announcer. He would, I have many stories about Phil Saltzman, but he played in our game. Members of the media played in the game. But one night, the conversation turned to, what is your favorite racetrack? And I hadn't been in South Florida that long. So I had visiting Del Mar with my dad when I was a kid, which I could barely remember. And then I had Canterbury, which I knew very well. I went to Exarban in Nebraska, which is no longer with us. I went to Prairie Meadows in Iowa. And then I went to the new Arlington International Racecourse, which was great. I'd seen about 5 racetracks in my lifetime, and now I'm in South Florida. And so the subject of Keeneland came up, and my boss said, have you been to Keeneland? I said, no, I haven't been to Keeneland. I've only been to a handful of tracks. He said, we need to change that. And I said, well, how are we going to do that? He said, well, I'll buy your plane ticket. And one of the writers down in South Florida, Clark Spencer, who still writes in South Florida, He grew up in Lexington. And so he offered to let me stay with his parents. And so because of my boss, Mike Cronin, I got a plane ticket to Lexington, Kentucky, and they would have their spring meet. The Keeneland spring meet would be before the start of when Calder started. So I would be able to go up. So I went up for a week. I knew nobody. Normally, if you know somebody, you call and say, "Can you leave me passes?" I just paid my general admission. And there's a generation that doesn't realize this. Keeneland did not have a track announcer. And that was one of the charms, no track announcer. And I thought, this is going to be terrible. But they would ring a bell. And when they rang the bell, that was telling you that the field was approaching the starting gate. So everyone would leave the betting windows, walk to the track apron. The horses would break out of the gate with no track announcer. And you'd watch them go around. And it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. And so from that moment on, I decided I would come to Keeneland every April before Calder opened. And so then I paid on my own dime to come up here just as a fan. And I very rarely get to do that anymore. And I love it. So it was here during the spring meet of it would have been 1999. I actually got the call from TVG that you got the job. I had auditioned like a couple months earlier. I remember the hotel I was staying at when I got that call, and my life changed then. And then when I got to TVG, Keeneland was one of the main partners that made the network happen. Without Keeneland, it wouldn't happen. So Keeneland was one of the first tracks to go, come and cover our meet, show it on TVG, but come on site. So I go on site, and actually, I should say this: I never lobby to go anywhere. My view is, if I'm the right person to go, send me. If I'm not the right person to go, don't send me. I don't want to force my way into any broadcast. You should always send the best people. So, but I did with Keeneland make an exception. We were all new at TVG, and I said, I want to go to Keeneland. If there's an opportunity to go to Keeneland, I want to go cover Keeneland. So they sent me the spring meet of 2000. It was one of our first big remotes. It was bitterly cold. I've been to like 25. No, I've been to more. I've been to like 30 Keeneland spring meets, 25 fall meets, and it's only snowed during the spring. It's never snowed during the fall. So it was bitterly cold. We didn't even have a set really. We had to move in because the weather was getting severe. And Nick Nicholson, who is the general manager of Keeneland, I'll never forget this. He's wearing a suit, and he's pulling these tables together, and he's pulling these chairs together so we can broadcast inside because the wind is terrible, the rain is terrible. And from that moment on, I just realized the people who work at Keeneland are different. The experience is the way horse racing is meant to be, as they say in their moniker. And so I loved Keeneland before I worked at TVG, and Keeneland has meant a lot to me during my time at TVG. I never want to miss the spring. I never want to miss the fall. And what's been nice about it, they felt the same way about me. Shannon Arvin is now the head of Keeneland. Her staff, every staff I've met at Keeneland, they just totally get it. So it's like renewing friendships every time I come back here. So yeah, I have to put Keeneland above all my racetracks. But I will say this: you know how I feel about Del Mar. I love the ocean, just the atmospherics of it. But I had a chance, because we don't do shows at Saratoga anymore. This past summer, I had a chance to go to Saratoga because I had a charity event for the Racetrack Chaplaincy of New York that Terry Finley of West Point Thoroughbreds had asked me to help out with. So I used that as an excuse to go up to Saratoga for a week and just be a fan. And, I do not participate in the argument anymore. Do you like Saratoga or do you like Del Mar more? What's the better racetrack? They're both great, and they're both great in their own ways. But am I getting the impression you haven't been to Keeneland?
I haven't been to Keeneland. I know it's on a list of mine. I'll be up at Santa Anita for the entire autumn meet, so I'm not able to make it out there this time, but I'm going to try and make it out there. I'm going to make a point to make it out there for the Keeneland spring meet because I need to make it there.
What I'm saying to you is I'm going to be your host. Like I'm going to take you around. If you like food, and I do, I got some great places, and we're going to go out. We're going to have a really, really good time. So all I'm saying is whenever you make that trip, if it's the spring or whenever you make it happen, make sure you contact me, and we're gonna spend some time at some of my favorite places. I love the surrounding area, and I love the city of Lexington.
I absolutely will take you up on that. That would be a massive treat to get to go around Keeneland with with the OG of TVG, as Matt Miller, who has joined us, says. He says it's like Chris Berman explaining what the first Sports Center was like. I couldn't agree more. Real quick, thank you to everybody that's been tuning in. We're almost at 100 people in here, which is incredible. Please, if anybody watching has any questions that you want me to ask Todd, I'd love to throw some of those up during the show. We'll start with my weekly co-host on Get Buck, Jackson Muni's awesome horse player. He'll be out next weekend at Keeneland. He said, Todd, curious to hear how you would try to attract those 20-something-year-olds betting on FanDuel Sports or fantasy and get them to bet on races consistently.
By not dressing up as anything else. The further I get into this, because that has been the question, growing our fan base and attracting 20-somethings. We've been trying to attract 20-somethings since I started in horse racing in 1985. So it's always that group that we're trying to get. And the one thing that I've come to realize, don't apologize for horse racing. It's great as it is. And here's the thing. Those 20-somethings that love the action of sports betting, the action is better in horse racing. Some of them are adrenaline junkies who just want the next play. Mm-hmm. Well, you have that opportunity in horse racing with simulcast out at the live racetrack. What I would say is, we are now living in a better time to cultivate those 20-year-olds because they get gambling. We did not have sports betting when I started out in 1985. It was taboo. Think of Al Michaels when he would cover football games. He'd have to hint about, he'd be like, well, this game isn't over. And he'd emphasize over because he couldn't come out and say, oh, they haven't gone over the total. Now you have a generation that knows what the total is for the game. They're watching for that. They're watching their parlays. So we are actually at an advantage now in horse racing that we don't even have to do this explanation of gambling and why gambling can be so much fun and have such a great return. And let's face it, there's no better gambling game than horse racing. We know that. That's why we're involved in it. I'm still evolving in my education of it. So my advice is don't back down from what we are. Yeah, it's nice to have a concert. Is it great that Travis Kelce owns a horse? Yeah, but are all the Swifties now going to come out and bet horse racing? No. So there's now a bigger audience amongst the 20-somethings, and I think we got to get out of this old mentality. Let's bring them out for a concert and then hope they find horse racing. No, let's bring them out for horse racing. And if it's dollar beers and it's the rest of that, that's great stuff. But don't shy away from what we are. We're the best gambling game in the world, and now we have an audience that understands gambling to begin with. There's no better time for horse racing than to cultivate that audience right now.
I think that's a perfect way to put it. Great answer. Thank you for that. And great question to Jackson. Yeah, people our age just kind of understand gambling now. Again, just to reiterate what you said, it used to be definitely a bit of a question mark, how to market that. But right now, that's all anybody talks about. And me, when I first got into racing, I was a kind of a sports bettor. So football, baseball, basketball, whatever. I'd throw together, silly parlays just to have action on a game. But you'd have to wait 3 hours, and the odds were plus 750 or something like that. Like they're not crazy. And then my friend just invites me out to Del Mar Pacific Classic weekend in 2019, and I go through the entire card. And I was throwing money left and right. I maybe hit one bet, but it was so quick and so fast, so furious. And then he told me, the parimutuel betting. So you're betting against other people instead of just the house. That's a massive part of this. And then just the prices and the parlays you can come up with that are over in, an hour if you play a daily double or less than an hour.
And think of what an advantage, because, having grown up, having explained wagers. So that's my whole thing. When someone's new to the track, I'll sit there and I'll try and explain, okay, there's horizontal wagers, there's vertical wagers. So then I'll explain a pick 3, a pick 4, and a pick 5. But now the audience that I'm talking to, someone like yourself, will immediately go, oh, that's like a parlay in sports. I'm like, yes. So we don't have to spend all this time going, well, you can take this many horses in this race and this, that's what a pick 4 and a pick 5. They already know, because you just go, it's a 4-team parlay, but it's horses and it's race to race. So yes, in that vernacular, and then being able to, do the jujitsu to turn it around and make it now horse racing as your parlay. It's a simple switch we need to turn. But I also think we need something what you talked about, and it goes back to my fan education roots. You need someone, I hope, to take you to the races. A friend like you had with your knowledge to then show you the direction, not give you everything, not give you picks and the rest of it, or you can't explain it in one day, but just to give you a little bit to get you interested, and then you'll take it from there. That's the other thing. We're dealing with a generation now that is very sophisticated and has information that they can easily access. At one point in South Florida, called a race course, I had 7 years of racing forums stacked on top of each other. There was no going to the internet and going to, Equibase and finding out anything. I would look through my old racing forums to see if a horse ran well on an off racetrack. But now think about it, you can just hop on, you can get whatever information you want. So to demystify our game is much easier now than it's ever been.
Absolutely. And I think the accessibility of the racing form, I personally, I love going to the track. I love just getting a paper form. I use Formulator and all those awesome tools as well when I'm at home, but there's still nothing like going to the track and just having the piece of paper in front of you.
Yeah.
But that's something that's available to us horse players that you don't really have that mainstream kind of availability for something like that for the NFL or for the NBA. There's no form on that. So to have something where you can look at these specific statistics of these, horses are creatures of habit. The jockeys, tend to ride the same race. They all have or not ride the same race, but ride similarly on those mounts, et cetera, et cetera. You can't explain it all in a day. You said it best, but you have that availability of the racing form. So if you just get somebody the track that is interested in betting and interested in wagering, maybe they love, pick five leg parlays, however you want to call it, you get to now kind of teach them like, hey, you get to kind of gain an advantage against all these other horse players because maybe 50 to 70% don't really know how to read it or don't read it. And then you have, that 30% that is anywhere from, first experience to 40 plus years of reading the form where you get that edge on other gamblers, and you can look back in real time to see how your opinions played out.
Well, you made a very good point. Having a publication like the Race Form is something that, unless you're out there searching for, different sites that the sports bettors don't always have. And that's what I just would say. I think we got to change our psychology in the sport, quit talking about what turns people off and talk about our inherent advantages.
Absolutely. Horse racing has a ton of advantages. It's something with a pretty steep learning curve, I would say. I asked my friend when I first got there, like, oh, well, so he had hit 2 pick fives on the Friday before Pacific Classic Day. So the early pick five, the late pick five, hit them both. Obviously that's incredibly hard to do. But we go to the track and we're just like, all right, cool. Like, what do I need to know? Like, similar to how I think like how the NFL is like, oh, the Seahawks good at home. The Browns bad on the road. Browns are bad always. I'm a Browns fan. It's a tough life. And he goes, well, no, see, you got to look. And like, he tried to give me, I think 5 tips that day, and it ended up just one ear out the other because it was so tough. One of the things that I still remember him saying was like, oh, well, if Hector Palma has, I forget the jockey's name, maybe Jorge Vargas, and it's BG Stables. Like, you got to look at them.
BG Stables. I was going to say BG Stables. Yeah.
I forget the jockey he used to use, but I was that. And then it was like, oh, bet Abel Cedillo on dirt with a Baffert. And then it was a bunch of these weird, like one-off things to look for. And I wrote them all down on my notes. And I eventually just had like just an array of the most random notes in my notes section of the most specific things to look for. But as I kind of got going, I got my own opinions, and everything's just kind of in my head now. But it is a steep learning curve to go on. But if you kind of just stick with it, it's something, you said it a little bit ago, you're learning every day. You get better every day because there's more information every day that you get to see in real time. You get to, form new opinions and build on former opinions as each race goes off. So that's something about the game that is really unique in its own way.
Yeah, look, the learning curve never stops. The first time I ever saw true, like something outside of the daily racing form that was built on quote unquote data points, which don't get me started on data points. But a guy showed up at Canterbury and he had paid at the time, I think it was $125, and it was called the Sire Stats Book. And you would open up this book and you'd look up, for example, one of the sires was I'm a Hellraiser, and it would show his percentage with 2-year-olds, his percentage with first-time starters, his percentages on off racetracks. And so this was amazing because this information was not available to everyone. The past performances were much different. They didn't have those stats in the past performances. And that was the first time I realized you can be ahead of the curve with some of the information. But what's happened now is we're saturated with information. Finding out the sire percentages, I can open up right now in a daily race performance available to everybody. That's why I think prices are less as well. So to me, it's the angles you've learned over the years that now are your advantage. I actually don't care what it says Hector Palma's percentage is in whatever particular situation. I want to look if the horse is owned by BG Stables. I want to look for the rider that you mentioned because that's what I've learned. I rely more on what I know and I've gleaned over the years than I do looking down and going, what's the ROI? What's the percentage there? So what you described there is something that Rich Perloff called about a handicapping toolbox. You have this big box and you put those angles away and you keep building it. And as much as I'd like to take credit for a lot of my angles, some of them are mine that I've learned, but most of them you learn from other horse players. Like you said with your friend, he gave you a few out of his toolbox. Some of them worked for you, some of you didn't. So you discard some and keep others for yourself. But I am more about going with what I know rather than, did you see this stat in the form? It doesn't really move me that much. And plus, here's the thing. You have this beautiful, multi-layered, I don't want to say complicated because I don't want to turn anyone away. I don't want them to think it is accessible. But why turn a game as beautiful this and as multiple layered into a number? Just one number. I just think there's so much to it. There are numbers that are powerful. They're great. It's why I drifted away from buyer speed figures. I know what goes into them. I made them myself. I know some people love it and they do their angles, but I realize how they're limited. That could be one part of your toolbox. But when you become all of a sudden, I'm just the numbers player. I mean, that's for you. It's not for me. I like to have angles in certain situations. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. But it's the knowledge you gain over the course of the years from other horse players and from your own experiences that ultimately, to me, will make a bigger difference than anything you find in a data point.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was really well put. And I know you didn't want to say the word complicated for how this game is, but it is. And that to me, I don't know, that shouldn't turn people away. That should make it more fun. That lights like the competitive fire in me of where it's like, oh, I can have an opinion. It can be my own opinion and I can be better than everybody else. Like if that's singling a 20-1 shot in a pick 5, which I did on either the show with Jackson or the show with Noah, and one of them called me crazy for it. But it's just like if I'm right, I get to be right. If I'm wrong, there's another pick 5 tomorrow. Like,
if something were easy, then it would never feel like an accomplishment. That's why when you hit a pick 5 and it comes back a good number, you've accomplished something because it's supposed to be difficult. I think the old football coach at Ohio State, Woody Hayes, said, nothing easy is worth a damn. And it's true. Like you should want a challenge, and horse racing is a great intellectual challenge always.
It absolutely is. Thank you for those great answers. Just to pivot really quick, we've been talking about, different racetracks around my good buddy racing downwind named Dave. He asked if there are any good stories you can share with you, Simon, and Frank from the early days at Hollywood Park, which of course is now the grounds for SoFi Stadium. But
there was Racing Downwind, first of all, is a great follow on Twitter. I've had a chance to meet him in person. He also brought a very nice bottle of tequila to Del Mar. So in the interest of full disclosure, I'll always say nice. But seriously, he puts out his picks out there. He loves the sport. He puts his money behind it. And I thought it was, there were some people who shamed him for the size of his ticket, so he doesn't put the size of his tickets anymore. I don't care what level you participate at, whether it's $12 or $1,200, you're putting your money up. I've never understood ridicule towards that. But I can tell you, anyone who knows Racing Downwind, he is a serious player. He loves the sport so much that he wants to be an ambassador, bring other people in. I cannot say enough nice things about him. Having said that, he's brought up really some of the great times when TVG was going on, the nighttime cards at Hollywood Park. I'll just say, there was a horse called Western Willie who wasn't a gelding, and he got a little excited before the race. It's somewhere out there. That video has to be out there still somewhere, floating around somewhere, recorded it. And I've never laughed so hard with Frank Lyons in that moment. Frank Lyons had some of the greatest lines, the most inappropriate lines that have ever been on air. He would, some of the stuff he would say, he would probably be canceled pretty quickly off the air. but those times were pretty free flowing and great. To give you an idea of how great Frank Lyon's wit was, and like I said, some is, some of it applied to horse racing, some of the stuff he told off air, but just for a generation that doesn't know Frank Lyons, he was one of our original on-air people. He's Irish. He came from Ireland. He came to the United States. He wanted to make it in horse racing. He came to Lexington first. He eventually ended out in California, and he didn't have any opportunities at the track. So he ran a flooring crew, and then he'd go hang around Hollywood Park. One day while he's hanging around Hollywood Park, a lady fires her trainer, is looking for somebody. Frank is in the right place at the right time. He ends up training her horses. He ends up winning the Breeders' Cup Sprint with Desert Stormer. Like, it always seems to work out with Frank. But to give you an idea of his wit and his charm, when he first came to the United States, he was living here in this area around Lexington, Kentucky, and he was driving through a small town, one of those townships out in Kentucky, and he gets pulled over for speeding. And it's such a small area that you have to appear before a judge when you get a ticket like that. So Frank gets his ticket. He has his court date. He walks to the small courthouse. The judge is there. It's Frank's turn. And the judge looks at him and he goes, "This is the second fastest speeding ticket I've ever seen in our township." And Frank, without missing a beat, goes, "I was following the other guy." The judge starts laughing the way you laughed, and the judge goes, "Where are you from?" He's like, "I'm from Ireland and just moved over here." And the judge tore up the ticket and Frank got out of the ticket. And that was the first introduction to America about the wit and Frank Lyons and his charm. And so imagine that guy on air with us every day. And so to give you an idea how that translated in horse racing, it was one of the first American Oaks they had. It was at Hollywood Park, and they attracted one of the first Japanese horses to come over to the United States in a long time and try and win a Grade 1, a horse named Cesario. And Fukunaga was the rider on the horse. That was the last name of the jockey, Fukunaga. And Cesario is warming up aggressively under Fukunaga. And we're all like, we've never seen a horse warm up like this, like literally running the race before the 1.25 miles on the turf. And I remember asking Frank, I'm like, "What's going on here? What's going on with this warm up?" He goes, "I don't know what the Fukunaga he's doing." And that's Frank Lyons. To some people, it's like, that's dumb, and to others, it's like, that's the most hilarious thing I've ever heard. But those were some good days. And to this day, I get a chance to obviously work with Simon, and everybody at FanDuel makes my quote unquote job easy. Because do I know the answers to most of the questions I ask? Yeah, because I've been around long enough. But that's not my job. I'm not there to show my knowledge unless it's an opportunity to do that, and that's what I'm supposed to do as the host. I'm there to ask the question that the audience may want to ask of our experts and give them a chance to show their bona fides and their skills. And so I've been very proud of the fact that I've been a good setup man that way, and some people understand that job and appreciate it. That's my greatest compliment. But I'm also beyond fortunate to have worked with some of the best in the business. And there's nothing better than when there's something going on at the track, like a shoe repair or something out of the ordinary is happening, and I can turn to Simon Bray and he speaks from his experience as a trainer. It really makes my job, as I said, easy, but also I get to learn along with the audience. So we've had great people over the years, Frank Lyons being one of them, Simon Bray to this day as well.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for that. That is something I really enjoy about you on air, is that when you ask a question, it's just to kind of get that knowledge out to the public through that answer that your co-host gives or your guest or whoever. I assume that most of the questions, when I hear them, I was like, there's no way Todd doesn't know this answer. But I appreciate that it's asked in such a way that it gives out that information to the public, so that the everyday horse player kind of gains a step in in either their handicapping angles or just overall knowledge of the game. So that's really cool for me. A favorite memory I have of you on air was I didn't get to see it live. It's a YouTube clip, but it was kind of released behind the scenes. I believe Simon was there as well, but it was when a horse named Giacomo won, the Kentucky Derby. And Ken Rudolph had obviously bet, I guess, quite a bit on that horse, and he had touted it for a while. And just seeing the entire crew's kind of reaction to that was a lot of fun to.
And that's my thing. I used to, there was a time just as a horse player where you're competitive, and if there was someone loud at the track and it's like you didn't win, you're like, oh. Now I love to see people celebrate, because I'm like, what problem yes, it's a pari-mutuel game. They just beat me. I mean, I guess you could look at it that way. But to me, I'm like, wow, they just connected with the sport. How can we not be happy about that? And we've all been there too, where you go through a long losing streak and then you bust out with this horse that nobody had. I do think horse players have to avoid trying to be the smartest person in the room. I think that could be your demise eventually. But there's nothing wrong with celebrating a great winner. I've seen some great winning celebrations at the track. I put one on my social media. I love when horse players do well. In that moment, like if you're watching that, how could you not, as someone maybe on the sidelines, go, okay, I want to be part of that. I want to be part of it. There's nothing worse than walking into something that's dour. Like when you walk into a casino, you know where the hot craps table is because they're screaming and they're having a good time. And then you see the people at the blackjack table, which I like to play blackjack, who are just, looking at their neighbors like, why did you hit on that horse, hit on that hand, and aren't very happy all the time. I think horse racing is a lot like craps in that way. When it's hot and it's rolling, everyone's having a good time. There's just no better feeling. And so I'm glad you connected with that, because that's what we hope the rest of those on the sidelines eventually do. They connect with how exciting it is when you conquer this game, be it for a race, a day, a week, a month, a year. It has the best highs of any gambling game out there, and the best returns as well.
Absolutely, yeah. And you mentioned connecting with the race, whether that's on a betting favorite or just in general, something that was just kind of in general, because I know, well, a lot of people bet on this horse. This was something where it just, captured the entire racing world. Jackson, again, just with the statement here, the live commentary after Zenyatta won the Breeders' Cup Classic is one of the favorite moments ever for him, for me as well. You captured that moment perfectly. That was a moment where just so many of the public, whether you bet on that horse or if for some reason you didn't, that you got to witness something truly, truly special, whether it was the dance in the post parade going out, or Zenyatta crossing the line first, or the incredible call by Trevor Denman coming down the stretch and then cutting to your live commentary afterward. That really just kind of tied everything together, I think.
Ryan, I have to tell you, if there's one thing that I hope people will always connect with me, is that I'm a fan and I appreciate the opportunity I've been given. Yes, there's a job we have to do and describe things and the rest of it. But I told you when we first started talking about racetracks, there was a time where I never imagined myself in Miami. I never imagined myself coming to Lexington, Kentucky and going to Keeneland. I was a racing fan, but those places that would have to be a special trip for me to get there. And then now I spend like 135 nights on the road, going to the fairgrounds, going to Gulfstream Park, going to all these amazing places. And I still step back and go, I'm privileged to be here, but I also know there's a good portion of our audience who can't get there. And I want them to feel what I feel, because I was in that spot where I could only imagine what those places are like. And then to now have a network where I can watch it, even if I can't be there in person, I hope we'll always have a voice on our network that will emote what that feeling is like to be there for that race, to be there for that horse, to be there for that racetrack. And so I always want to be that voice. However long my career has, that's the most important thing to me. If you can't be there, I want you to have the next best thing, me telling you what the experience is like and what the moment is like. And sometimes I miss it. I don't find the right words and get it across, but I think you'll hear the emotion in my voice, and I'll be trying to get it across. And then there are those moments like with Zenyatta where it just flows perfectly, and she's perfect and the moment's perfect. And so to hear you guys say that means a lot, because I said this last week when it came up. I was at American Pharoah's Triple Crown after the long drought. I was at Deep Impact at Tokyo Racecourse with him coming back before 140,000 people. Incredible moment. But Zenyatta winning the Breeders' Cup Classic, I don't think I'll ever have anything top that in the rest of my career. I know I haven't had anything before it. It was such a joyous. Really felt like people were levitating out of the racetrack. The happiness that people had, girl power, the signs that we had up. It was truly the perfect moment at the racetrack. And then a year later, it was the most depressing moment at the racetrack when she lost. I literally, people were in tears because we just wanted one more. That's what I love about sports, and what I love when our sport, when it connects with people, is you just want another. And that was a hard part about her going out and losing. It wasn't just the end of the streak; it was the end of those good times that we had. The end of that Breeders' Cup Classic. It's like we're not going to get that back. Now we did get American Pharoah, and he took a little bit out of that Zenyatta bottle, but this whole idea of we got to compare eras, we got to compare horses, we got to compare athletes. Just stay in the moment, appreciate it for what it is. And I have to say that Breeders' Cup Classic in Zenyatta, best moment ever at the racetrack for me. I'm so glad you guys felt that I captured it properly.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, you definitely did. And yeah, I wish I was into horse racing in 2009 when she won, because man, that would be quite the scene to see at Hollywood Park. And then obviously, yeah, you mentioned the next year, just the complete opposite of emotions. Yeah. It looked like it was going to happen again and just lost by, a nose. Yeah, I agree with your sentiment of just, I've never understood the comparing horse to horse, because, they'll run at different times. Like a horse that I just love to watch, even though he only ran a few times, was Flightline recently. I got to see him twice in person. Once at Del Mar in an optional claimer in his second career start, and then again in the Pacific Classic the following year. And it was just one of those things where, yeah, you don't really bet on the race. You just get to kind of sit and you get to watch, the greatness that is that horse. You get to appreciate the moment, appreciate the race call. And then, you kind of move on, but you always just keep that as kind of your core memory of that. But there's no, it has never made sense to me to compare, Flightline to Ghost Zapper or to Secretariat. It's just like, well, just appreciate the horse that ran in the moment. We don't need to, tear the horse down because he didn't win the Belmont by a country mile, or only ran 6 times. You can just appreciate what you saw when that horse ran.
And that's what I love. We're talking about sports in general. I can remember after Tiger Woods won the Masters, I was living in South Florida, working at Calder. We had tickets to Doral, and so he was coming to play Doral. And we set up on a hole and waited for Tiger Woods to come through. Tiger Woods just starting to take off. And I to this day, I remember what that golf ball looked like off the tee. And I'll remember that the rest of my life. When you see greatness, it stays with you. And to say you were there matters. Okay, I wasn't there to see Jack Nicklaus in person, so I don't need to have an argument between Tiger Woods and Jack Nicklaus. I just know what I saw with Tiger Woods. I know what I saw with Flightline. Did I wish I would see it more? Yeah. In the end, Zenyatta had 14 more starts than him. He was just here for that brief, shiny moment, 6 starts. But I was privileged to be there to watch him win the Pacific Classic, the FanDuel TV Pacific Classic, by 19 3/4 lengths, something I just don't see how we'll ever see again. So take those moments in, and to be able to say, like you said, you were there, that separates you, because not everyone could be there. That is phenomenal.
Exactly. Yeah. It was just a great moment to be there. That's something I'll remember forever. Whether or not he's the, greatest horse of all time, I don't care to have that really debate. It was a horse that I got to see. That was the greatest horse I've ever seen in my life, being there in person. And that's all I really hang my hat on and care about. I know there's another question I want to ask about kind of your favorite race, if you have one. I know that's a very loaded question. I do want to ask you something that it was important. I saw you mention it on X yesterday as the report came out, but I think we all kind of saw the full crop report come out with, the numbers going year to year and everything like that. And I think you and I, as fans, and everybody watching here, is a fan of horse racing overall. But I just kind of want to ask your thoughts, and what do you think we can improve on? Because, the issue where the full crop is declining year over year, yet the number of stallions covering 200 plus mares year over year is increasing. That seems like a number those seem like two statistics that shouldn't, be inverse of each other. They should probably correlate. If the full crop's going up, then more stallions. It shouldn't be, there's this high monopoly sort of situation going on at the top. And then not to mention so many of those are Kentucky bred. I know that is the horse racing state. That's where the heart of horse racing lies. but we still do, horse racing can succeed countrywide. So I just want to kind of see your thoughts, and how you kind of perceived all those numbers and everything.
Well, it was depressing because when I started out in horse racing, the full crop was near 40,000. And so the projected full crop for next year is 17,300. And when you think of the 17,300 they're talking about, they're not all going to make it to the racetrack. So we have to ask ourselves, what are the field sizes going to look at in various parts around the country? What the industry is behind on and starting to come around to is that we're all in the same ecosystem. People pay lip service to it and say, oh yeah, what happens in California. No. If you cannot make it in California, you're not a viable industry. I don't care what's going on over in New York. If things are going well, then California needs to learn and we need to help each other out. California needs to care about what's going on in New York. New York's got to care in California. We got to care all the way in between. So as you said, not only is the full crop down, then when you go state by state, California is in a desperate state. From about 20 years ago to the point where we are now in California, they have 2,500 less California bred foals being born each year. That's why when you put up a big purse in a California bred optional claimer, you only get a field of 6. That never used to be the case. And it is not something where New York or another state can say, well, that's California's problem. No, it's all our problems because we all support that same ecosystem. It is going to take, I'm hoping that Mike Rapoli not only goes from social media and pointing out what's wrong and offering ideas to enacting those ideas. I give him credit because he's bought California breds. He's raced a few horses out in California. But it is literally going to take owners like Mike Rapoli, who have so many horses, to say, okay, we need to support California racing. And they literally have to bring horses out to California. As far as incentives amongst the breeding programs, maybe you incentivize them based on how many graded stakes winners are foaled in a particular state, but you have to support these state programs as well. It's not just about the national numbers. You have to go from the national full crop number and then start to look at where are we at in California, where are we at in Maryland, where are we at in Indiana, where are we at all around, and figure out how you can bolster those. I know there was an idea that was put out there that was kind of shot down rather quickly, and that was some of the embarrassment of riches for Kentucky. Can't they put that in incentivizing what's going on in California? And that was kind of laughed at. But I think we're going to get to that point where you can't just look at it as, well, this is our money here, this is our structure, we're doing great, don't worry about it. No, we have to worry about it because people want to race all over the country. We should have our sport in every major market in the country. If you're just going to write off a market, think about that. Think about baseball just saying, okay, we're just not going to have a stadium in this. But look at what the A's are going through and where they're eventually going to end up. But imagine all of a sudden you just don't have that team anymore. I mean, we're closing racetracks with no plan to save the other racetracks that are there and just going, well, their time is done. No, once they're gone forever. We're not building new stadiums anymore. We're not building new racetracks, that is. So, yeah, it's going to take some bold leadership, but it's going to take a recognition by this industry that we're all in the same ecosystem. Great for Kentucky, great for other states that are able to do it right. Some of them have built-in advantages. Some of them have recognized the warning signs and done well, but we still have to worry about our neighbor. And as an industry, we still have to help other jurisdictions along. So, yeah, it's going to be bold leadership, but it's a problem with a lot of issues that need to be addressed. But yeah, that full crop number was pretty startling.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you credited the right guy in Mike Rapoli. I noticed this year he had a ton more horses racing at Del Mar to the point where when I noticed that he had 5 in the span of 2 weeks, and that was something we're not used to seeing out there. Normally he has maybe one a summer, but it was something that I pointed out and was talking about because I was happy to see that he was backing up his words with his money, sending money over to the Calbred program to get racing out on the West Coast. I also think it's a little bit of a double-edged sword with tracks like Kentucky or the multiple tracks in Kentucky, in Florida and New York. A lot of them get supplemented from casinos. And California doesn't have that luxury, which doesn't in turn help our purses, which then directly correlates to not maybe getting the most full fields. But yeah, having the California full crop down 2,500, from when it's that's not great. It's not going to lead to bigger fields. And California racing, yes, they say we're on like an island out here, if you want to call it that, because of the whole ship thing. But it's California racing. Racing wouldn't be the same without Del Mar and Santa Anita, tracks that have been there for a long time, tracks that have a lot of historical value, tracks that the Breeders' Cup love to come to, whether that's just for the the sights and the sounds, or the tracks in general. I like to think it's a little bit of both. But I think we gotta. It's not going to be fixed overnight. We got to keep making steps to, as you said, look out for our neighbor, take care of our neighbor, because it is horse racing as a whole. It's not horse racing in Kentucky or horse racing California, horse racing New York. It's just horse racing. So that's something that I think we can maybe keep working on. Oh, might have lost Todd here. Real quick while Todd kind of fixes my slight technical glitch. Thank you, everybody, for joining. If you guys have any questions, please put them down in the chat. Make sure on Wednesdays, 6 p.m. Pacific time, 9 p.m. Eastern, head over to the HHH Racing podcast. Okay, we got Todd back on now. I'll bring him back. Todd, welcome back. Thanks. Can you hear me all right? Todd, can you hear me?
I think I've somehow lost you.
Okay. Anyway, head over to HHH Racing Podcast Wednesdays. We will be running our Pacific Horseplayers show that is hosted by Noah Meagher, co-hosted by myself. That's every Wednesday. Once a week, you get me and Jackson Muniz on the mic for Get Bucked. Thank you to the 140 people in here to watch this special episode of the Gallop Out with Todd Schrupp. He will be back in just a moment. Just some technical difficulties. Technology is great when it works, shitty when it doesn't. But make sure after this, we'll wrap up in probably about 15 minutes or so, right around 4:30 Pacific time. And then please head over to the HHH Racing Podcast to watch Betting and Boozing. They're doing their weekly show. They're going over, I believe, Keeneland. I gotta look at their description again, but I believe they're doing Keeneland today. It is going to be an awesome show. Obviously, what can be bad about a show that's drinking and boozing? Oh, all right. Todd will be back in just a minute. Just replying to him. But again, please, if you guys have any questions when he gets back in, I'd love to throw some of your questions up from the chat. And yeah, we will keep this thing rolling. To everybody that's joined again, I can't say thank you enough. Please subscribe to the channel. Keep those notifications on so I can get you guys, more and more content. If there's anything you guys would like, new from the channel, if you guys would like me to reach out to any other guests and get those guests on, I'd be happy to do that. That would be something that I think could be fun if you guys all, have someone in mind. I know Todd Schrupp was at the top of my list for basically the last couple months. Was really excited to get him on here. I saw him early in the summer at Del Mar. This is just a fun Todd Schrupp story, but I saw him and I was speaking with Dave Weaver, who was off the clock. Todd was over in the booth, and he must have been alive to something because the last race at Del Mar, maybe the fifth race at Del Mar, was going off, and Dave and I were just having a conversation. We look over, and Todd is just fist pumping in the air. He's cheering his heart out, going for it, and it was fun to see. But looks like Todd may have to have taken a call. I took up about an hour 15 of his time. I told him it was only going to be about 30-45 minutes. I want to thank everybody for joining. If I get him back on, I will let you guys know, but I'll probably wrap it up. We'll do a separate recording if so. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Please subscribe to the channel. Please like this video, repost it so we can kind of get this out. He gave a lot of awesome information, both about his experiences from the start of TVG back in 1999 all the way till now. We talked about the full crop and everything like that. So please subscribe, head on over to HHH in about 15 minutes. Go do your thing. Go join Betting and Boozing. They're going to be a great time over there. Thank you guys for watching. I've been your host, Ryan Anderson, and I will see you soon.